If you want to write stories your readers will love, there are 3 things you need to do. Understand storytelling principles, see how other writers have applied those principles, and then use them in your own work. Here on the Story Nerd podcast, our goal is to demystify story theory. We'll help you with the first 2 steps so that you can get started with the third. I'm Melanie Hill, editor, poet, and award-winning author of middle grade novel Jet Cooper, and I help writers identify and solve their story problems.
And I'm Valerie Francis. I'm a writer and a story editor, and I teach women who are writing in all genres how stories work so they can finish their books faster and without frustration.
On today's episode, Valerie pitched Birds of Prey and the fantabulous emancipation of one Harley Quinn so that we can study antiheroes. Now, this 2020 film was directed by Kathy Yan from a screenplay by Christina Hodson. And of course, there will be spoilers because we can't talk about the movie without talking about the movie. And please help other writers find our show by leaving a rating and review. For Apple Podcast listeners, you can do it right from your phone. Simply go to the show's landing page and scroll to the bottom. It's that simple. And if you're watching us on YouTube, please be sure to hit the like button and subscribe so that you never miss an episode. All right, Valerie, I am super curious to hear what you think about Harley Quinn, because you're not really a superhero movie kind of person.
It's not that I don't like superhero movies. It's that Marvel required such an investment of time from me that was too much of a commitment. So I bailed quickly. But I did like the early ones, and the ones that I've seen have not been too bad. Okay, so this season I'm studying the 4 types of protagonists. And this week, my focus is on the antihero. Now, unfortunately, antiheroes aren't featured in most theory books. They may be referenced in passing or in a way that assumes the reader already knows what an antihero is. And yeah, sure, we tend to have a sense of this character, but many writers don't really understand them. And I know this from this one question that, writers keep giving me over and over and over again. And the question is this: how do you create an emotional connection, i.e. empathy, between a reader and a protagonist who is unlikable? Now, it's a good question. Nothing wrong with the question. But the fact that it comes up so often tells me many things. But chief among them is that the writer doesn't understand what an antihero is. I think the antihero, as a protagonist, is a place where writers have an extraordinary opportunity to innovate the genre that they're writing in. Now, this might not work in all genres, to be fair, but if you're writing a main character who is particularly complex, creating an antihero might breathe life into your story. Just stay with me here. Let me explain. We tend to have one concept of an antihero, and that is, someone who is like the character of Sam from last week's episode. At that time, I described him as an off-the-shelf antihero. So he's an older man, usually white, usually grizzled. And he's better at killing people than the other characters, and he's better at cheating death than the other characters. The way Robert McKee defines an antihero supports this stereotypical presentation that we've all come to know and love to hate. and that's through watching like a lot of American Hollywood films. So here's how McKee defines the antihero in his book Character, the Art of Role and Cast Design for Page, Stage, and Screen. And this comes from page 157. McKee writes, an antihero is, quote, a loner hardened by bad luck but vulnerable to the suffering of others, a stoic bemused by his own suffering, sharp-witted in public, self-mocking when alone, cynical about society's rules, committed to a personal code, a romantic wary of romance. Then on page 214, when he's discussing the difference between an action hero and an antihero in a crime story, McKee writes this, quote, an antihero is a moral realist capable of both virtue and vice. The difference is that he sees it in himself and so hardens on the outside to protect a better self within. He appears too cool to feel anything, but at heart he has a passion for justice. An antihero carries a villainous version of himself deep within as he struggles to obey his private code and keep his morality intact. He knows that a life spent coping with crime will slowly deaden his soul, but head down, he plows ahead. Now, there is another theory book that I like that has a slightly different view of the antihero that I think is worth exploring. The book is Writing for Emotional Impact, Advanced Dramatic Techniques to Attract, Engage, and Fascinate the Reader from Beginning to End, and it's written by Carl Iglesias. So I just want to read to you what Iglesias has written here, and this is from page 51. The lost soul, also known as the antihero, is a character who's the opposite of the reader. The character who takes the wrong turn, who goes down the wrong path. He's morally defective and represents the darker side of human nature. This character evokes fascination since we're intrigued by glimpses of the dark side. Maybe we feel a hint of guilty admiration for their courage to be bad and challenge established morals. This is why actors often admit enjoying playing flawed characters, especially villains. They're not likable. So to form the crucial bond with them, the reader must understand them and admire something about them. Their intelligence, their motives, their lack of options, or even a rare positive value such as loyalty to a family, caring for another human being, or passion. Okay. I like that Iglesias refers to the antihero as the quote-unquote lost soul. That's a much more interesting concept to me, and I think it applies to a much broader type of protagonist. I mean, just think about how many main characters in young adult or new adult books are lost souls. How many protagonists in coming of age stories are lost souls? Like, so suddenly, if we think about the character as a lost soul, this stereotypical or archetypical antihero now opens up to possibilities. So Iglesias wrote that these lost souls or antiheroes are, quote, not likable. So to form the crucial bond with them, the reader must understand them and admire something about them. So their intelligence, their motives, their lack of options, or even a rare positive value such as loyalty to a family, caring for another human being, or passion. Aha. Okay, so now this is when it gets particularly interesting to me, because I think it's here that we have the key to creating an emotional connection between a reader and an unlikable main character. And this is the question that I get so often, right? The key is to allow the reader to understand them or admire something about them. So this brings me to Harley Quinn. In the opening minutes of the movie, the filmmakers give us Harley's background. She was abandoned by her father and abused by the sisters at the orphanage, yet still she managed to get an education, a PhD in psychiatry, no less. So we can root for that kind of character, right? Or at least we can sympathize with her. She has also had her heart broken once or twice, that's what she says, because, quote, finding love is not easy. Now, this is something everybody can empathize with. Harley threw herself into her work, again, something we can all relate to, and then fell in love with her patient, the Joker, and she lost all sense of who she was. Now, there's a whole lot of people who can empathize with that, being in a relationship and sort of losing yourself in the relationship. Maybe not to the extreme of Harley Quinn, but we can we get a sense of what she's feeling. It is not completely foreign to us, sadly. So Harley was the brains behind the operation, right? Yet the Joker got all the credit, right? Like, Like the women listening to this podcast right now are nodding their heads. Boy, can we ever relate to that. Whether it's a romantic partner or a colleague or a boss, very often the man takes the credit for our work. I can't speak for anybody else, but I've been there and it ticked me right off. Now, we would empathize with Harley a lot more if we actually saw her go through all this rather than being told it as backstory. But, Melanie, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's what happens in Suicide Squad, right? Like there is another movie where we went through all that with her. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And the relationship between Harlequin and the Joker is actually quite abusive. So he's quite abusive towards her and, coercive control, a whole range of things. So I think the reason this movie was made was because there was probably a lot of inbuilt empathy for Harley Quinn, even if she is herself an anti-hero. Yeah.
All right. So that makes total sense to me. And in this case, and we've talked about this on the podcast before too, if you're writing in a series, at the beginning of a second or subsequent book in the series, there is by necessity a bunch of exposition to bring the reader, or in this case, viewer, up to speed on what's happening. So that's what we're getting here in the beginning. The viewer's being brought up to speed on what happened in those other movies, because like me, not everyone has watched it. Okay, so that's all exposition in the beginning. What about the rest of the movie then? How does Harley Quinn show up on the screen as an anti-hero? Well, I think it's pretty easy to see how she fits into McKee's definition of an anti-hero. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. I think it's pretty obvious. I'm far more interested in how the filmmakers created empathy or an emotional connection between the viewer and this character who is, as I think we can all agree, an anti-hero. She is unlikable. She's a murderer. She killed the guy who sold her the pet hyena, Bruce. She rams into people on the roller skating rink. She breaks the chauffeur's legs without a second thought. Like she's not a nice person. But I think we can empathize with her in two key areas. So first, being Joker's girl gave her immunity. So listen, her education, her intelligence, her physical strength, her pretty impressive ability to be a villain, all of this is ignored by the people of Gotham. Harley is defined only in relation to a man, the Joker. So when Roman and others discover that Harley and the Joker are no longer together, she becomes a target. Regardless of her accomplishments, all her worth is tied to a guy. Been there. The second area that we can empathize with Harley is this. She is kind to Cassandra. Now, we know Harley thinks nothing of killing a person. We saw that when she adopted Bruce, right? She just killed the guy. So she could have easily cut the diamond out of Cassandra's stomach and used it as leverage to save herself from Roman and his goons. But she doesn't. She puts Cassandra's welfare first and instead decides to wait for Cassandra to poop out the diamond. This puts Harley's life in grave danger, but it protects Cassandra, who is a child. She's a minor. Now, of course, Harley then continues to protect Cassandra to the end. Even though at one point she claims that she's going to use the girl as leverage only, we don't believe that, not for a second. And in the end, she takes Cassandra on as an apprentice, which, gives this homeless child who's been bounced around from one foster home to the other, gives her a home and a purpose. Interestingly, the other characters in the Birds of Prey, in this collective of characters, they're all anti-heroes. So if you're writing a story that has an unlikable character, or if you're writing a straight up anti-hero protagonist, or maybe a group of anti-heroes, this might be a film you want to watch because there's some interesting stuff happening in here. Through all the spectacle, there's still some interesting storytelling technique at play. Pay particular attention to how Harley's experiences are mirrored by the huntress, right? They both have childhood trauma. By the Black Canary, both of them, their skills are overlooked. By Renee Montoya, both of them have men in their life who take the credit. For Renee Montoya, it's her colleague. And even Cassandra, they both have childhood abandonment. They, in foster care and orphanages, all that kind of stuff. And notice how all of those adult women who are all anti-heroes, they all care for Cassandra. They're all looking out for her in this story. So to go back to how Iglesias defined the anti-hero, he said, these are lost souls and none of them are likable characters. So, quote, to form the crucial bond with them, the reader must understand them and admire something about them, their intelligence, their motives, their lack of options, or even a rare positive value such as loyalty to family, caring for another human being, or passion. And that's exactly what happens in Birds of Prey. All right, that's all I have to say about that. Melanie, how did you go with your study of the premise this week?
Well, it was actually really interesting this week, and I'll get into why, because I think there's a mismatch between what the movie is and what it's meant to be doing. And I think we draw that out when I go through the second part of my analysis this week. But first of all, I'm going to look at two one-sentence summaries for Birds of Prey from the internet, and then I'm going to use two different methods that I've talked about to create my own premise. And, and one of these in particular is what we use in our own Story Nerd study and our Story Nerd courses. Now, here is the first one, which is the log line from IMDb. And I quote, after splitting with the Joker, Harley Quinn joins superheroines Black Canary, Huntress, and Renee Montoya to save a young girl from an evil crime lord. End quote. In this one, we have an inciting incident, which is splitting with the Joker. The main character is Harley Quinn. The action, she joins Black Canary, Huntress, and Renee Montoya. The stakes are she saves a young girl, so her life is at risk. And the force of antagonism is an evil crime lord, which is Black Mask in this instance. Now, this log line follows the second formula that I've used this season and used to analyze or create log lines this season. And again, I think it would be good to use as a guidepost if you didn't have a sense of your ending. Now, you could start with a story with a clear idea of what you need to do if you use this sort of formula or use these story elements to create your one-sentence summary. And what is really interesting is that this log line is only 25 words long, so it's quite short. Now, I would actually dispute the inciting incident. I don't think that the breakup with the Joker is the thing that incites the story. I actually think it's Harley blowing up the chemical factory that sets off all the chain of events. And gets everything else going in the story. And we'll just put a pin on that because I'll talk about that a bit later as well. Now, the second internet summary that I found is actually two sentences. So here we go. Mind over mayhem. Harlequin joins forces with a singer, an assassin, and a police detective to help a young girl who has had a hit placed on her after she stole a rare diamond from a crime lord. Now, I'm not sure why the mind over mayhem phrase is used, because I would actually describe the movie as mayhem over mind. I don't think there's much mind. I think there's more mayhem. But the second sentence has a similar construction to the first. The only thing that's missing is the inciting incident. Now, let's have a look at what I find when I try to create a premise. And I'm going to go back to Truby's premise, which formula or suggestion, which is that a premise is a simple combination of character, plot, and event that starts the action we also need a sense of the character and a sense of the outcome of the story. So here's how I break the movie down. The character and a sense of her is that Harley Quinn is an anti-hero and chaos creator. The plot, she protects a young girl from the evil Black Mask. The inciting incident is that Harley Quinn blows up the chemical factory where she and the Joker fell in love, which indicates that she is not under the Joker's protection anymore. The sense of the ending is that she gathers some allies who all go up against Blackface or Black Mask and defeat him. So here is really my summary sort of sentence that I've come up with, or a premise. A chaotic anti-hero blows up a chemical factory and has to gather allies to fight and defeat a psychotic underlord. Now, as I was trying to formulate my own premise, I stumbled across a story problem, and I think I've hinted at this before, but I'll try another method before I present my theory of what's wrong. Now, this is a bit of a summary sentence that we use on our Trinity courses and also in the analysis that Valerie and I do when we're studying together behind the scenes. Right, so the sentence roughly goes like this. When the inciting incident happens to character or characters, they have to overcome an obstacle to complete a quest in order to, or else the stakes, right? So that's roughly what it is. So here's how I break down the movie. The inciting incident is that a chemical plant blows up and indicates that the Joker is not protecting Harley Quinn anymore. The character is Harley Quinn, and she is a chaotic and violent sidekick. That's how she starts the movie. She overcomes obstacles. So everyone that she's harmed in the past is after her to get their revenge. The quest that she's trying to complete is she needs to save a girl who stole a diamond from Black Mask. And the stakes, well, Black Mask wants to remove Harley Quinn's face and kill her out of revenge. Sort of, because Black Mask actually has a couple of things that he's going after. Now, when I pull this together and use the formula that we use, this is what I've come up with. When chaotic and violent Harley Quinn blows up a chemical plant, it indicates that the Joker is not protecting her anymore, and she has to sidestep everyone seeking revenge in order to save a young girl from Black Mask, another psycho crime lord. Now, the mixed up timeline in this movie, I think, confuses the inciting incident. And therefore, the objects of desire are also mixed up for Harley Quinn, but also for the antagonist. So in this instance, we'll think about this as Black Mask. His object of desire isn't clear in the first half of the movie. Harley also wants the diamond. She wants to avoid Black Mask, and she wants to save Cassie and break out on her own. That is a lot of objects of desires for one character to have. Now, the inciting incident, whether it's breaking up with the Joker or blowing up the chemical plant, only connects to some of the plot points. This makes it very difficult to identify the obstacles, the quest, and the objects of desire. Now, to understand why this happens, we need to understand what the movie is trying to do. This movie is an origin story about the birds of prey. This means that we need to understand the ensemble cast and not just Harley Quinn. The title makes the point, right, that the movie is about the birds of prey, and the emancipation of Harley is a subtitle. But Harley is such a feature character, and she tells the story in first person via voiceover, that it creates confusion, I think, within the movie. What's also odd about this movie is that Harley Quinn isn't a member of the Birds of Prey. All right, So, if I was to summarize the problem that I've identified by trying to retrospectively fit a premise, it's that this movie is trying to do too much. It's creating an ensemble crew and establishing Harley Quinn as a villain in her own right. And she also ends up with a sidekick, which is Cassie, the young girl that she's protected. Now, a movie with Harlequin has to be chaotic because that is who she is, and that is absolutely on theme for her. But a clear object of desire for her and the villain, Black Mask, would have made this better. Now, each of the birds of prey have varying objects of desires as well. Some are strong, others are weak, and even unrelated to the movie plot altogether. Now, I'll cite Black Canary as my evidence to that. She seems to want to keep her job, and that's it, really. Eventually she helps Harley, Cassie, and Renee Montoya, but it's because she's a decent person rather than anything else. It's really not linked to any object of desire that she has. Now, I would consider what I'd want an ensemble cast to do in this movie. And as I start to look at this, I think, what strong example could I use to have a look at how I want this ensemble cast to come together? And I actually really like the logline for the Avengers, which is Earth's mightiest heroes must come together and learn to fight as a team if they are going to stop the mischievous Loki and his alien army from enslaving humanity. Now, using this as an example and including a sense of the ending for Birds of Prey, I would propose a premise like this. An unlikely group of chaotic women, including Harlequin, must come together to fight and defeat the evil face-removing Black Mask and save a young girl and find a family's lost wealth. So just like I did last week or the week before, I'd also create individual summaries for each character. So for Harley, I would do something like this. After announcing her breakup with the Joker, Harley Quinn must fight all the people she's wronged and rescue a young girl from Black Mask to establish her own identity as a villain. Now, when we study movies that have elements missing, it establishes, I think, a case for why a premise is essential. If you have a good understanding of your protagonist, the inciting incident, the obstacles or plot, and what's at stake, then you should be able to write your premise. All right, Valerie, over to you for your final thoughts.
All right, I'm going to put out a challenge this week. I am challenging writers to think about anti-heroes as more than the stereotypical bad guy with a heart of gold. Think about anti-heroes instead as lost souls who can be incredibly nuanced characters. And that means that even though they're unlikable characters, there are plenty of ways to create an emotional connection between the anti-hero and your reader.
All right, that wraps it up for this week. Join us again next week when we discuss Serenity. To support the show, please leave us a rating and review and tell your writer friends about us. And if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. And if you want us to review your query letter and first 10 pages writing sample, go to storynerd.ca for all the details about how to submit. To join Valerie's Inner Circle, go to valeriefrancis.ca/inner circle. And for more information about me, visit melaniehill.au. And remember, story theory doesn't have to be difficult. It's a tool to help you write more, not less. So take it one step at a time and have fun.